What is intentionality and why is it important? The term most closely associated with phenomenology is intentionality. The core doctrine in phenomenology is the teaching that every act of consciousness we perform, every experience that we have is intentional. It is essentially consciousness of or an experience of something or other. Our awareness is directed toward objects. If I see some visual object, such as a tree or a lake. If I imagine, my imagining presents an imaginary object, such as a car that I visualize coming down the road. If I am involved in remembering, I remember a past object. If I am engaged in judging, I intend a state of affairs or a fact. Every act of consciousness, every experience is correlated with an object. Every intending has its intended object. We should note that this sense of intent or intention should not be confused with intention as the purpose we have in mind when we act. He bought some wood with the intention of building a shed. She intended to finish law school a year later. The phenomenological notion of intentionality applies primarily to the theory of knowledge, not to the theory of human action. The phenomenological use of the word is somewhat awkward because it goes against ordinary usage, which tends to use intention in the practical sense. The phenomenological use will almost always call up the sense of practical intending as an overtone. However, intentionality and its cognates have become technical terms in phenomenology, and there is no way of avoiding them in the discussion of this philosophical tradition. We have to make the adjustment and understand the word to mean primarily mental or cognitive and not practical intentions. In phenomenology, intending means the conscious relationship we have to an object. The egocentric predicament. The doctrine of intentionality then states that every act of consciousness is directed toward an object of some kind. Consciousness is essentially consciousness of something or other. Now, when we are presented with this teaching, and when we are told that this doctrine is at the core of phenomenology, we might well react with a feeling of disappointment. What is so important about this idea? Why should phenomenology make such a fuss about intentionality? Isn't it completely obvious to everyone that consciousness is consciousness of something, that experience is experience of an object of some sort? Do such trivialities need to be stated? They need to be asserted, because in the philosophy of the past 300 or 400 years, human consciousness and experience have come to be understood in a very different way. In the Cartesian, Hobbesian, and Lockean traditions, which dominate our culture, we are told that when we are conscious, we are primarily aware of ourselves or our own ideas. Consciousness is taken to be like a bubble or an enclosed cabinet. The mind comes in a box. Impressions and concepts occur in this enclosed space, in this circle of ideas and experiences, and our awareness is directed towards them, not directly toward the thing outside. We can try to get outside by making inferences. We may reason that our ideas must have been caused by something outside us, and we may construct hypotheses or models of what those things must be like, but we are not in any direct contact with them. We get to things only by reasoning from our mental impressions, not by having them presented to us. Our consciousness, first and foremost, is not of anything at all. Rather, we are caught in what has been called an egocentric predicament. All we can really be sure of at the start is our own conscious existence and the states of that consciousness. This understanding of human awareness is reinforced by what we know about the brain and nervous system. It seems unquestionable that everything cognitional must happen inside the head, and that all we could possibly be in touch with directly are our own brain states. I once heard a famous brain scientist say in a lecture, almost tearfully, that after so many years of studying the brain, he still could not explain how that avocado-colored organ inside our skulls could get beyond itself and reach out into the world. I would also venture to say that almost everyone who has gone to college and taken some courses in physiology, neurology, or psychology would have the same difficulty. These philosophical and scientific understandings of consciousness have become quite widespread in our culture, and the egocentric predicament they force us into causes us great unease. We know instinctively that we are not trapped in our own subjectivity. We are sure that we do go beyond our brains and our internal mental states, but we do not know how to justify this conviction. We do not know how to show that our contact with the real world is not an illusion, not a mere subjective projection. For the most part, we have no idea how we ever get outside ourselves, and we probably treat this issue simply by ignoring it and hoping that no one will ask us about it. When we try to think about human consciousness, we start with the premise that we are entirely inside, and we are greatly perplexed as to how we could ever get outside. If we are bereft of intentionality, if we do not have a world in common, then we do not enter into the life of reason, evidence, and truth. Each of us turns into his own private world, and in the practical order we do our own thing. The truth does not make any demands on us. Again, we know that this relativism cannot be the final story. We do argue with one another about what ought to be done and about what the facts are, but philosophically and culturally find it difficult to ratify our naive acceptance of a common world and our ability to discover and communicate what it is. The denial of intentionality has as its correlate the denial of the mind's orientation towards truth. A colorful expression of the egocentric predicament can be found in Samuel Beckett's novel Murphy. About a third of the way through the book, in chapter 6, Beckett interrupts his narrative to undertake a justification of the expression Murphy's mind. He says that he will not try to describe this apparatus as it really was, but only what it felt and pictured itself to be. The image he presents is the one we have found to be all too common. Murphy's mind pictured itself as a large hollow sphere, hermetically closed to the universe without. Here the mind, with its intramental world, there the outside, the extramental world, each sequestered from the other. However, the mind is not impoverished by being so confined. Rather, everything in the outside universe can be represented in the inside, and the representations are, according to Beckett, either virtual or actual or virtual, rising into actual or actual falling into virtual. These parts of the mind are differentiated from one another. The mind felt its actual part to be above and bright, its virtual beneath and fading into dark. The mind is not only placed over against the universe or the real world, it is also placed over against the body that is Murphy's other part. Thus Murphy felt himself split in two, a body and a mind. Somehow or other, the body and the mind interact. They had intercourse, apparently, otherwise he could not have known that they had anything in common. But he felt his mind to be body-tied and did not understand through what channel the intercourse was effected, nor how the two experiences came to overlap. The isolation of the mind from the body entails an isolation of the mind from the world. He was split. One part of him never left this mental chamber that pictured itself as a sphere full of light fading into the dark, because there was no way out. How the body could influence the mind, or the mind the body, remained another mystery to Murphy. The development of what looked like collusion between such utter strangers remained to Murphy as unintelligible as telekinesis of the Leyden jar, and of as little interest. The Cartesian predicament that Beckett describes, with the mind taken as a large, hollow sphere, light-filled but shading off into darkness, closed off from both the body and the world, is the unfortunate situation in which philosophy finds itself in our time. It is the cultural situation, the human self-understanding, within which philosophy must begin. Many of us do not know how to avoid understanding our own minds the way Beckett's Murphy understands his. This epistemological dilemma is the target of the doctrine of intentionality.